There is this one government office that has been the bane of existence for landlords for years. And that one government office is known as This is the Landlord Advocates, where we help landlords become better landlords. I'm your host, Matthew Lyman. Welcome. That one government office has a few names. 1, the building inspector, or 2, code enforcement, or 3, neighborhood revitalization office. Now, we understand the existence of code enforcement. We understand that they want to make sure that where tenants live is the way it should be. But we understand and we endorse code enforcement when it comes to another type of landlord called a slumlord. We're not going to deny that they don't exist because we landlords know that they do. Those are those landlords that rent out properties that are run down, terrible, falling apart, have no care in the world, just so that they can get a tenant into the apartment and collect their money. Those types of landlords, we good landlords do not like. We fully endorse code enforcement and the actions that they must take to stop slumlords. But our video today is looking at the other side, the other types of landlords, and what code enforcement does to us and how we relate to them. Our video is going to look at 3 aspects. First, what is code enforcement? 2, we're going to look at code enforcement tenant horror stories that we landlords have had to endure. And thirdly, we're going to look at issues that we as landlords want code enforcement, building inspector, and other government offices to address, really to address immediately. And when we address those and when we're talking about them, you're going to agree 100% with what we have to say. Now, what code enforcement does is in many municipalities, they grant what's called a rental certificate or a certificate of occupancy, which makes the apartment, says that the apartment meets minimum habitability standards that a tenant can live by. Now what we're going to do, we're going to repeatedly mention rental certificate or certificate of occupancy. Instead, we're going to just call that the document. So whenever you hear us say the document, that is what we are referring to. So when code enforcement comes out and they inspect the apartment, they look for like the heating system, the furnaces, the hot water tanks, the electrical, the GFI, the roof, holes in the walls, things like that. They look at a myriad of issues to make sure that the apartment meets the standards necessary for you to rent out. Now, some of these documents are based upon the structure itself. They may be for half a year, 18 months. It goes with the building. Others go with the individual, the tenant that is. And that's ones that we're going to look at right now. Every time you get a tenant in the dwelling, you need to get one of these documents. Certificate of occupancy, rental certificate. You need to get one of those. Now, a lot of times you have to have the tenants' names on those documents. So therefore, you have to have the tenants put into the apartment. Then you go to the code enforcement office to apply for the rental certificate. Then they'll come out and they will inspect. Now, how can we get around that? How can we get around having the tenants already in before the inspection? Some municipalities allow landlords to get this document for 30 days prior to moving in the tenant. We suggest for those municipalities that allow that you landlords should actually do that. And there's reasons for that. One of which is, let's say you get the tenants into the apartment. They're there now. Now you have to go into the rental. There's issues in the apartment that you don't need to get fixed and you want to do that. The tenant won't let you in. The tenant says, oh no, you're not coming in at all. Therefore, you can't get the rental certificate, and in many courts, if you don't have that, you can't get a judgment, and you may not even get the eviction. What you need to do in cases like that is immediately send notices to the tenants all the time. Take pictures of the notices, text messages to your tenants, emails to your tenants, telling them that you want to come in and inspect the apartment. You also should immediately go to your buildings department and apply for the rental certificate or CO. Keep the receipt. Schedule the inspection, even though you know it may not happen. Then that way there, when the inspector comes out and cannot inspect to give you this document, you will have that proof and that evidence among the other evidence that you've already accumulated to take to an eviction court to say, here's why we don't have the document, because the tenants will not let us in. Now, one of the other things that some government offices have, which every single one should have, is a brochure or a pamphlet for landlords that will have the main points that they look for when they do an inspection. If they have it, avail yourself of this document. Have your contractors, your maintenance people come look, make sure that they meet all of the points that are contained on that pamphlet, so that when code enforcement comes out and they do the inspection, the likelihood of you getting that document is good. That's what we suggest that you do. Now, on to the horror stories. The issues that landlords have had to deal with code enforcement and on tenants combined that have made being a landlord a terrible thing. We're going to address a few. We're going to point out a few that we know that many of you have already faced. We have got hundreds of stories. We're only going to touch on a few for time-wise. Absolutely, we don't want a 3-hour video. We have a landlord right now who has a tenant who contacted code enforcement and claimed that she has had no heat for 2 months. Code enforcement came out, did an inspection, gave the landlord an appearance ticket. The landlord had to go to a virtual hearing in front of the judge. Upon examination of the documents and upon examination of the evidence, what that is, a tenant can claim no heat for 2 months. Well, what proof do they have? They had no heat for 2 months. What proof? Either way, this landlord was hit with a fine of $3,700. He came to our office to have our team represent him in court to get that eradicated or at least lowered. Here's the issue in this. This tenant at that time owed 1 year's worth of rent. 1 year. So you claim you had no heat for 2 months. Therefore, you had 10 months where you shouldn't have paid the rent because you had no issues. If you had paid that rent to the landlord, you may not have had any heat issues to begin with because the landlord would have had the money to fix the problem that you may or may not have caused. But the fact that you haven't paid rent for a year, but the landlord is faced with fines and having to repair this work, even though you owe a year's worth of rent. Code enforcement, take note of that. Take note of that. We had a landlord as well who had a broken, had a broken door, a Luan door, those closet doors that are made out of paper practically. Had one between the sidewalk and the street, that little grassy area. Had one of those doors there. The Neighborhood Revitalization Office came there on a Friday at around 7:30, 8 a.m. and took photos of the door, went back to the office, had the assistant draw up the necessary paperwork, and issued a citation to the landlord to correct that problem or face a $250 per day fine. Here's the problem with that. This was issued on a Friday, sent out certified mail to his P.O. box. The post office is only open from 9 to 12 on a Saturday, closed on a Sunday. He had to have that remedied by that Monday. Or face a $250 a day fine. How crazy is that? He ended up taking care of the door, did not have to pay a $250 fine, but he did have to pay a $50 administrative fee. The fee probably cost more than the damn door itself. Now we had another situation where a few years ago, our neighborhood revitalization, our code enforcement office, the law department, and the waste management department at our local city hall was looking to have landlords fined and also had to hire a professionally licensed exterminator to go into the houses to exterminate because the trash collectors found roaches inside trash cans when they were taking the trash and throwing it into the truck. Well, we fought that. Our team fought it and said, no way. How is it that the government can ascertain that the trash sitting in front of that house of the landlord actually came from that house? How do we not know that it did not come 10 houses up or 3 houses down and was put in front of that house? You can't prove where that trash came from, where those roaches came from. That issue was put aside. But in some municipalities across America, it may be something that you may have to deal with now or in the future. So be careful. Then we had another one where the landlord had a 2-family home, and on the same day, both hot water tanks broke. On the same day. How does that happen? 2 of them on the same day? Code enforcement was called out. The landlord had to hire licensed professionals to take care of this situation. There was electrical issues there. He had to pay for that. But we know what happened. We know what happened. The tenants didn't want to pay the rent. So therefore, they caused problems for the landlord. We had a case where our office represented the landlord in a single-family home. The tenants withheld rent because they said that they had no heat in this home. Therefore, they weren't paying the rent. My colleague had called me. It was a nighttime court. Had called me. And I remember exactly where I was when he called and said the judge wants to have a hearing on this case. I will admit, I became so angry that my ears or my eyes started to water up. I was so angry that there was going to be a hearing because the tenants withheld their rent, claiming that they had no heat. In the summertime! In the summertime! You have no heat, so you're withholding the rent for that? And we're going to have a hearing on this? Are you crazy? I was very angry when I heard this. Reason being is that the tenants did not have heat over the winter time. There was a water pipe that broke in the basement, and the water went into the furnace and destroyed the furnace. And the landlord did nothing about it. Well, here's why the landlord did nothing about it. Because the tenants owed so much in rent, they never notified the landlord that the hot water tank had busted or a water pipe busted and ruined the furnace because they didn't want to have to pay the rent. They didn't want to have to be brought into court. So they said nothing to the landlord. So not only did the landlord have to evict for non-payment of rent, but now the landlord has a water pipe that broke and has a new furnace that they have to replace. And the tenants had the audacity to claim that they had no heat and they did not want to pay the rent because they had no heat, even though they were the cause of why they had no heat. We have another one where the tenant is a Section 8 tenant, has broken numerous windows in the apartment. Code enforcement and the Legal Aid Society got involved. They sent a letter to the landlord indicating that he must allow the tenant to literally replace these windows. He came to our offices. Our team said, no way. No way. What qualifications does this tenant literally have to replace those windows? What will the liability be if those tenants fall out onto a child or hurt somebody because she did not know what she was doing? What we agreed to is that the tenant would pay the landlord a fair price to have the landlord have a contractor come out and fix the windows. But to have the tenant have Legal Aid Society saying to the landlord, the tenant wants to fix them and let the tenant do so. No, that should be up to the landlord. He owns the house. Another time, a tenant called code enforcement and complained that there was a softball-sized hole in the wall, in the hallway, going up to their second floor apartment. The landlord had to deal with that, literally. A hole. Yeah, it doesn't look good, yes, but how does that affect you living in the apartment? It doesn't. It doesn't. We had another case that we had in court where the code enforcement officer refused to issue a rental certificate to the second floor apartment because he had claimed that the sidewalk down below was cracked and broken. We had fought that one in court, and we won. Reason being is that you have the sidewalk, but this house sits on a hill. So you have one set of stairs. You have a second set of stairs. You have a third set of stairs that are around the house to get into the house. Then you have another set of stairs going up to the second floor. The sidewalk was so far away from the apartment, how can you claim that the habitability of that apartment is not able to be done because the sidewalk is broken out in front? How? We won. The landlord got the eviction and got the judgment. We won that case. We had another one where the code enforcement officer, housing inspector, came out and did the inspection. And one of the issues that he had looked at was that little piece of wood that goes right underneath your kitchen sink. That's the one that our grandparents had, the towel rack on, the butterfly towel rack. That piece of wood was missing. The tenant had crafted a pretty towel and had taped it up nicely to fill that hole. The housing inspector said, no, that has to get replaced. Seriously, how is that little hole preventing the tenant from living in that apartment? Many of us in our own homes have issues that we live with and have no problem living with. But a tenant can't do the same? Then we had a funny one, a real funny one in court. The tenant had complained that there were discolorations on the walls and in the apartment. Not mold, just discolorations and they were withholding the rent because they didn't like it. The judge in this case, it was amazing. It was amazing. He told the tenants, in our master bedroom, my wife and I have discoloration on our bedroom ceiling. He said, it's there. He said, you know what I do when I see those spots on the bedroom ceiling? This was amazing, landlords. You had to laugh, but you had to keep it inside. Our judge said to that tenant, I roll over and go back to sleep. He completely dismissed their argument of discoloration. And these are just some issues that landlords have had to face with code. When code looks at every little minute issue in the apartment to deny that document to the landlord. And sometimes that document is necessary to get government assistance to pay the rent for the tenant. Now, some of the issues that we want code enforcement, building inspector, the mayor's office, and the town supervisors, and the government in general and in a whole, we want these issues addressed. These are issues that every single one of you are going to say, oh my God, yes, I've had to deal with this. I've had to deal with this. This is ridiculous. Please help. Yes. Why is it that when the landlord gets this particular document, when the tenant calls up code to complain about the dwelling, why doesn't the code enforcement office inform the tenant, you do know that your tenant or your landlord has the certificate of occupancy and the rental certificate with your name on it or the address on it, so that maybe some of the issues that you're calling about might be issues that you may have caused? Why don't they say that? Why? Why is it that when there's minor transgressions, maybe the grass is a little too high and the tenant's supposed to cut it as part of their lease, or they put the trash on the day early or keep the trash cans out a day later, why is it that it is the landlord that is hit with the fines, or hit with at least an administrative fee that might be $50 to $100? Why? It's the tenant that put the trash out early, or kept the trash cans out later. Why isn't the landlord has to pay that fine? The next ones are hot button issues, and every landlord in America is demanding answers to this. We, on behalf of landlords across America, are demanding answers as well. Why are tenants not held criminally liable when they willfully destroy the apartment, break the windows, rip up and destroy the carbon monoxide detectors, the smoke alarms, the hot water tanks, the furnaces? Why are they not held criminally liable for doing that? How is it that if I am walking down the street and I throw a rock through your tenant's front window and it lands next to the 3-year-old child sitting on the sofa, how is it that I am going to get arrested and face multiple charges for doing that, but the tenant inside the same apartment can take a frying pan to the windows and nothing happens to the tenant? Why? Should not the tenant be held criminally liable for that? The same outcome could happen. The child can be hurt. Why are they immune from being arrested and charged? Why? Why is it that the landlord can face all these criminal charges for the property not being up to code, they get arrested, carbon monoxide detectors are missing, fire smoke alarms are missing, even though you had the CO and the rental to show that you had it, and the tenant took them away, you have to repay them, you have to do the work to get them back up to the way they were, or you are in trouble. Even though the city, the government, the town, the village knows that you had all of that when the tenant moved in. How is it that the tenant can contact code enforcement after having sabotaged the dwelling, and the landlord has the CO and the rental certificate, and then the tenant is not being held liable, but the landlord is? To what degree is this document helping us? It's not helping us, and the government is not holding the tenants accountable for their actions. How is it that a landlord can commence an eviction proceeding against a tenant? That tenant can now contact the building inspector's office and file complaints regarding the property. And now the landlord can very well face the music in court of having a retaliatory eviction against the tenants. So you started the eviction process. The tenant then contacts code enforcement And now you're in trouble because now you've committed a retaliatory eviction. We have done multiple training seminars, landlord training seminars in the upstate New York area. And one of the things that we tell landlords, and we say just like this, shut your mouth. Shut your mouth right now. What do we mean by that? When you were at the apartment and you were so angry with your tenant for not paying the rent or breaking this or that or whatever it might be, and you tell them, that's it, I'm done with you, I'm evicting you, you're out of here, you're gone. When you leave, don't you know what they're gonna do? They're on their phone as fast as they can to contact code enforcement and complain that the toilet is broken that they just broke 5 minutes earlier. Or the windows are broken and the furnace don't work. Because you ran your mouth and said, we're going to contact code enforcement, or we're going to contact the court when you get thrown out. Landlord, shut your mouth, go and start the process. Come to professionals, have us do the work for you. Then you'll have the documentation to show that you initiated the process before the tenant went to code enforcement to complain about the dwelling. Do that. That will help you tremendously. This video is being filmed right now during the COVID-19 pandemic. Even though these code issues are ones that we've been facing for years, it hits us particularly hard now. Because we are in a position where many of us cannot evict our tenants for months on end, but yet we are compelled to do the necessary repairs on the dwelling, and if not, we face multiple charges, multiple fines that will consume even more money that we don't have. It hits us even harder now. One of the things that we are asking the government to address immediately, not tomorrow, not the tomorrow after that, not yesterday, but now, is that tenants must be held criminally and financially responsible for their actions. For their actions. They need to be held accountable for that. Maybe you as the government are not doing that, because by holding the landlord responsible, you know you're going to get money from us. You may not get it from the tenant. We know as landlords, we don't see much money from tenants when we have to evict them, especially now during COVID. So maybe it's a source of revenue for the government to come after the landlord rather than the tenant. If they were to come after the tenants for this behavior, then maybe the issues in these apartments and houses may not exist. And therefore the houses will be in the way that they are. It will stabilize the economy. It will stabilize rents, so landlords don't have to raise rents repeatedly for the next tenant to cover the damages that the previous tenant caused. And they'll have more money in their pockets in order to invest that money back into the community, or at the very least keep the rents lower. So see, government, instead of seeing landlords as a source of revenue when it comes to code enforcement, rectify the problems that the tenants are causing, and slumlords, go after both. Absolutely go after both. And you may find that the communities that you are representing will be better when you do that. Code enforcement and building inspecting offices and government offices. Be aware that we landlords across the country again are coming together to address these problems. The unfairness must come to an end. We are willing to work with you. We are asking that you work with us. Landlords, until next time, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell, because as you well know, more videos are coming. Hit the like button. Leave comments below. We want to see those comments. Share this video with other landlords and other platforms across America. Until then, take care.